for almost
Welcome to Behind the Investigation with Atlanta News First. I'm investigative reporter Anastasia Olmos. I am joined by the one and only Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe. Hello, Brendan. You have done a very important piece. Tell us about it.
Yeah, good to be here, Stassi. What we're talking about today is the First Amendment, and it may sound like a wonky story about the Constitution, but what it comes down to is how it's being applied in the city of Sandy Springs, Georgia, where the city council has passed 3 ordinances limiting the First Amendment. And what they do is one sort of, whether on purpose or not, targets the local free newspaper that's delivered to every single home in Sandy Springs. And then another one of them says you cannot speak within 8 feet in public, 8 feet from someone who doesn't want to hear what you're saying. And it doesn't mean you can't speak. It means you have to step back 8 feet from them. They call it an 8-foot buffer zone, and you can now be arrested if someone disagrees with your speech in Sandy Springs.
I'm concerned about this one.
We're trying to protect everybody's rights in this case.
This feels like an overreach for me.
The council's been put in a very uncomfortable position here.
You are breaking new ground. That's what leaders do.
And if you don't help us out, chaos will ensue. You've got to help us out.
Sandy Springs police have new arrest powers after city council criminalized the location of public speech and the time of literature delivery.
a neo-Nazi group littered my neighborhood's lawns, including my own, with hate-filled leaflets seeking to sow fear in the Jewish community.
Former TV reporter Mike Pachenik spoke out against the measures, even though his family received anti-Semitic flyers at their Sandy Springs home.
Why not just charge somebody or write them a ticket for littering? Why paint with a broad brush and preclude legitimate media outlets from delivering their newspapers overnight?
The Sandy Springs Crier is now forced to deliver its free paper after 7 a.m. Any earlier would be a misdemeanor.
Limit solicitation and the delivery of uncontracted for literature into the residential neighborhoods between the hours of 9 p.m. and 7 a.m.
If App and Media put something at the end of someone's driveway at 6:50 a.m., and someone calls and reports it, then what happens?
The police will come and handle whatever needs to be handled.
Hearing the city attorney say that if someone were to deliver the Sandy Springs Crier, then the police would show up and handle it.
Carl Appen publishes the Sandy Springs Crier. The newspaper was already suing the city for withholding public information from police incident reports.
What is in these incident reports that they're not giving you?
Literally almost every single thing that actually is taking place.
Do most cities give you these records?
Every single city gives us these records with the exception of Sandy Springs.
Sandy Springs won a dismissal of the case in Superior Court, but Appen Media appealed to get the case reinstated.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no?
No.
The item is approved.
They voted on this case a week and a half after the appellate court ruled in our favor.
This is now the law in Sandy Springs. If Appen Media were to deliver their papers at 6 a.m., they're breaking that law.
And if the neo-Nazis now want to deliver their hateful content to my front yard at 7 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning, they can do it.
After limiting freedom of the press, Sandy Springs outlawed public speech within a certain distance of a non-consenting listener.
It establishes this 8-foot buffer zone. If two people are in a common area where they have a right to be, and one doesn't want to talk to the other doesn't have a right to be closer than 8 feet to them, espousing whatever the other person doesn't want to hear.
Your rights end at basically your neighbor's nose. We've made that nose a little bit further out.
So now we actually are applying this 8 feet rule everywhere. Everywhere.
And all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
The item is approved.
Speech in public places in Sandy Springs is now illegal within 8 feet of anyone who doesn't want to hear it.
It was an Israeli event, and we had 2 individuals that had the Arab headdress on with 2 Palestinian flags that walked into the crowd. They weren't saying anything to them. They weren't approaching them, but they were just walking through that event. The feeling of the community out there was outrage. and my guys had to grab them pretty quick and get them out there. This ordinance will help us do that.
So you would arrest someone just for walking through a group of people?
Yes. If they were walking with a Nazi flag, with this ordinance, we would arrest them. Palestinian flag, we would arrest them.
What this means is I, as a journalist, approaching someone on a public sidewalk in Sandy Springs, if I just want to ask them a question, if they say no and I ask them one more question, I'm committing a crime.
Correct. And it doesn't matter who that other party is. It could be a city council person, heading to their car after a big vote. If you do not leave, then you are in violation of the law.
The front page of the next edition of the paper read, "Sandy Springs restricts forms of speech." The paper containing news of those new First Amendment restrictions was delivered after 7 a.m. to avoid breaking the law.
Wow, there's so many different parts to this. Us as journalists, we understand really what's at stake here is, our communication of holding entities accountable. But for the viewer, just starting with the basic, First Amendment there, what is the viewer really, how are they impacted by
Well,
this?
it means if you're in Sandy Springs and you're on the public green and you are talking about positive or negative about Donald Trump, and someone next to you feels the opposite, they can now ask you, well, first they can say, I don't agree with you. And if you at that moment don't step back 8 feet, they can call the police, and the police will either counsel you or they have the power to arrest you. And this isn't a ticket, it's a misdemeanor. So Georgia doesn't have violations like some states do, where a sort of a sub-criminal violation. Everything in Georgia, speeding ticket is a crime in Georgia. So this is a crime. You can be put in jail. And you'll have to go before a Sandy Springs judge and face either a fine or jail or whatever the judge wants to hand out, short of a year in jail is the maximum penalty that a city can give out.
Right. When I watched this, I thought about my reporting last year that I did when I was in Los Angeles on the protests. I mean, we had them every week, but from UCLA, the flashbangs and everything thrown, and everyone was saying, why wasn't this stopped? And then I would be out on the streets of LA in front of synagogues where, the pro-Palestinian and the Jewish church there was clashes, and it got violent. And, this type of law is supposed to stop that kind of thing. But, there's also the freedom to protest. So was there any situation here that Sandy Springs was like, we cannot have this violence? Or was it just that flag that walked through a crowd?
Well, I mean, there have been a few protests, and then there have been people who are upset about it. Now, Sandy Springs has a large Jewish population. And so when the police chief said the community was outraged, that is because there are far more Jewish residents than there are people who support Palestinians. And there also was some confusion in the meeting, conflating Hamas and people who are sort of arguing that Israel should change what it's doing in the war with Palestine. So look, this is a very fraught subject, right? So you're going to step on some toes when you're talking about this. But what's interesting is when the chief said the community was outraged, what he was describing was unpopular speech. And the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled again and again and again that unpopular speech actually deserves greater protection than popular speech, because popular speech doesn't need any protection. It's already popular. Typically, without turning this into a con law class, where the Supreme Court has drawn the line is creating a public panic. This is often used as the wrong example, but it's sort of screaming fire in a crowded movie theater when there isn't one. Inciting a riot. These are the kind of things, is silently carrying an opposing flag through a crowd inciting a riot? Someone might say yes.
Wearing something on your shirt.
Right. It has to be content neutral. And it came up in the meeting where, this one council member asked, and she's Jewish, she said, if I wear the Star of David and walk through that crowd, would you arrest me? And he said, if it's a Palestinian group. In other words, if the speech is unpopular with the group that's there, then yes, we would arrest you. And I think that's where this could face some constitutional challenges going forward, because nobody has passed a law like this that basically says you have free speech except within 8 feet of someone who doesn't agree with you.
Yeah, I'd really never heard of it before. You also mentioned that there is a blocking the entrances ordinance that passed.
Yeah, that was unanimous. Everyone in council agreed. And basically, it really just codified within city law what's already against the law. Disorderly conduct is also described as blocking sidewalks and vehicular traffic and things like that. So there really already was a law in the books for this. This just sort of reinforces it. And it says that if you're carrying on a demonstration or a protest, you can't block driveways and exits and entryways to buildings. This has come up before with abortion clinics, for example. And they've said, no, you can't do that. You can't stop people from going in and out. And that was really passed without controversy.
Okay. And then that third one there was the newspaper. Not everybody, reads a newspaper, the paper form. They, wake up to an email possibly or go online. But what is really the consequence here?
Well, I really think the question is was this a coincidence? A week and a half before they passed this ordinance, the newspaper, the Sandy Springs Crier, won in the appeals court in its records lawsuit against the city of Sandy Springs. And then there they are passing a law that really directly affects the newspaper. The Appen Media, Carl Appen, had said these incidents of anti-Semitism, thankfully, in Sandy Springs have been rare. Mm-hmm. He says his newspaper is not rare. It's delivered every single Tuesday morning to every single residence in Sandy Springs. It's a free newspaper. And with the exception of people who opt out, people can call him and say, I don't want you littering my driveway with this stuff. There was talk about trying to prevent free newspapers or really anybody from throwing something on your lawn. I mean, that was sort of the argument was someone can throw anti-Semitic messages. They can also throw a newspaper and it piles up and it litters the city and it blows in the wind. Can we ban this? And when they looked at the case law, they said, wait, we can't ban this outright because there actually was a case, the city of Sylvania, Georgia tried to do this. And the local newspaper actually won in the state Supreme Court. So it's already illegal in Georgia to ban newspapers around the clock. So what they said is, well, let's look at other case law. We can actually ban this for a certain range of hours, but as Mike Pachenik said, that means now the neo-Nazis can start at 7:01 a.m. putting their hateful messages on my lawn. You're only banning it from 9 p.m. to 7 a.m.
So their claim is that it's targeting the paper.
Well, the newspaper certainly feels that way, and you either have to believe it's an incredible coincidence that this all happened within less than 2 weeks, or look, there's a protracted battle between the Sandy Springs Crier and City Council. For a small town newspaper, this isn't one of those. Sometimes the headline is City Council makes bold move. They're very cheerleading some small town newspapers. This is not one of those. They hold the city accountable, and now the city is holding the newspaper accountable, and they're forced to deliver after 7 a.m. It doesn't affect the Atlanta Journal-Constitution because the ordinance says uncontracted for literature. It's kind of an odd phrasing, but basically if you subscribe to the AJC, they're allowed to deliver before 7 a.m., just not the Sandy Springs Crier, which is no friend of the city of Sandy Springs.
Gotcha. Yeah. And, if you weren't there reporting on this meeting, how many, we don't know how many people would have really heard about these laws passing, and people could end up in Sandy Springs protesting and end up in jail. These are, consequences, real big consequences. So great reporting. Is there anywhere as of right now where this might be challenged, or is this just law for now?
Well, it is the law, and what it's going to take is someone with standing. Whenever you hear, a case was dismissed for lack of standing, it sounds like this wonky sort of, legal technicality. But what it means is, and I don't have a law degree, so this is just my analysis as a journalist who's covered a lot of legal things over my 35 years doing this. Standing means you have to have suffered an injury or been prevented from enjoying some freedom. You have to have suffered some sort of damage. It can be a very, very small amount. It could be a penny, but you have to be in some way damaged by this. So you can't just sue because you don't like the law. What it's going to take is a Rosa Parks style case. So what needs to happen for this to get before a judge is someone has to say, I was damaged by this. Someone has to get arrested for speaking or refusing to move 8 feet from someone who disagrees. Or the newspaper, you could argue, has standing because they have already suffered an injury. The injury they have suffered is they're not allowed to deliver before 7 a.m. Many of their delivery people have other jobs. They have day jobs. Well, if they have to deliver after 7 a.m., are they going to be able to make it to their job? Can they deliver all those papers within 2 hours and still make it to their 9 a.m. job? And so they have suffered an injury because they're not able to freely disseminate public information. On the flip side, and I think it's important to point this out, the police are saying that, look, we need a tool, because you mentioned these protests like in Los Angeles. When the police get there, two sides both have a right to be there. That's what the city attorney argues. But how do you separate them? And we can't force two opposing sides to be, we can't have a peace line between them. And what the police are saying is this 8-foot rule, they're not looking to arrest people, according to the police department. They're looking for a tool. The threat of arrest will allow them to keep a sort of gulf between the two sides of the protest and to keep the peace. And they were asking for this tool. The question is, though, what happens when I, as a reporter, ask a question on the street to someone like a city council member, and they don't like the question? They can now call the police and have me arrested if I ask another question when they said no to the first one. Same thing goes with any member of the public. And I think when you start restricting these freedoms,
Right.
there are side effects that were unintended, and those are the ones that are most concerning. I would expect a lawsuit from the ACLU, probably backing someone who does get arrested, and one from Appen Media, very likely.
Okay, and we know that you will follow this closely and keep us updated. You're really good about knowing what's going on, and every single day, always coming in with news. Brendan, our chief investigative reporter. If you want to watch any of his reports, our reports, we are always here in looking into something going on in the greater Metro Atlanta, Georgia area. We do have our website, atlantanewsfirst.com. You can watch us on YouTube, listen to us on YouTube. We also have our podcast wherever you stream your podcast. You can really listen to us 24/7 if you really want to. Thanks so much for watching and listening today.
Thank you for watching ANF Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First